Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to demonstrate 9 watercolor techniques that will teach you how to use watercolor paints. The materials you will need are watercolor paper. I recommend using 140-pound weight paper. Watercolor paints. I always recommend you prepare your paints before painting. Paintbrushes of different varieties and a paper towel. I have divided my paper into 9 boxes for the different techniques. I'm going to begin by demonstrating on how to do wet on wet. The first thing I'm going to do is get a paintbrush and dip it in water and wet the surface of my paper where I want to paint my wet on wet technique. In this case, I'll be doing it in the wet on wet box. I'm covering only the area I want to paint and leaving the rest of the area dry. Once I have completely wet the area I'm going to paint, I take my paintbrush and dip it in the paint and brush the area that is wet gently by moving around the paint. You'll begin to notice that the paint will remain only in the wet area unless you push it out. You could increase the intensity or deepness of the color by adding more color to a certain area. I use this technique when I want to create a soft flowy area like the sky. Where you want a deeper color, add more color to that area. Don't overbrush the area. The trick is to move the paint gently in the wet area with your paintbrush and then allow it time to dry. In my next box, I'm going to demonstrate on how to do wet on dry. This technique is very important when adding precise detail to your painting. Take a clean paintbrush and dip it in the paint, and then use the paintbrush to paint on the dry paper. You will notice that the paint will stay exactly where you placed it. I always use this technique when I want to add details to my painting, like a stem on a flower or fine lines, etc. But you must use this technique only when your paper is dry. If your paper is still moist, then the technique won't work. You could also make scratchy details using a dry brush. Next, I will demonstrate how to fade your paint from dark to light. Take your paintbrush and begin brushing your paint from one direction down, and it will gradually start losing paint. You could also help it along by either cleaning your brush as you go along or wetting your brush in order to remove some of the paint. As you use this technique, you will begin to see how the color starts to fade as you go along. It should fade from dark to light. The next technique I'm going to show you is called blotting. This technique involves the removal of color from your paper using some form of paper towel, Q-tip, or even a clean paintbrush. I'll be using a paper towel. I'll be wetting my surface where I want to be painting, and then I'll apply a generous amount of paint. Once that is completed, I'll take my paper towel and I'll use it to lift the paint off. Depending on what you want to create by blotting depends on how you'll use your paper towel. I like to use a small section at a time so I have more control over the area. I use this technique often to create soft, fluffy clouds, or to soften the area in an area where I need less color. I will also be demonstrating using a Q-tip to show how it is done. With the Q-tip, you will be creating circles or dot blotting. I sometimes use this for adding details to my flower painting. The next technique I will be demonstrating is resist. This is done by using something with wax like a crayon or oil pastel. The wax will prevent the paint from being absorbed by the paper. I'll first take a white crayon and draw my paper. I'll probably be drawing a heart, tic-tac-toe, or anything in order to demonstrate this technique. Be sure to press hard so that the wax stays on the paper. The wax is what's going to end up resisting the paint on your paper. This is a great technique to create veins on a leaf, for example, or anything similar. Once this is done, gently paint over the wax resist and you will begin to see your images show through. Now let's look at the technique known as bleeding. Bleeding is done almost the same way you do wet on wet technique, except that you will introduce 2 or more colors. First, be sure to wet your paper thoroughly. I will begin by painting the area in one color, and then I will introduce another color next to it. Your final result should be the subtle blending of one color into another. The next technique that I will be demonstrating will be a graded wash. You could do this technique with wet on wet or wet on dry. This technique involves taking one color and gradually blending it into another color. I'll be doing it using the wet on dry technique. I will take my blue and start on the top, bringing my color 1/3 of the way down. Then I will use the purple and begin slightly touching the blue and begin working my way down. I'm only going to go about 1/3 of the way because now I want to start adding the pink. I'll begin painting with my pink and slightly touching the purple, and then finish going all the way down. The colors should gradually merge with one another. This technique works really well with wet on wet, but I wanted to demonstrate it that you could also do it with wet on dry. The next technique is called glazing. It is a technique used to paint transparent layers over one another. I will begin by applying a paint on top of the painted layer, and with every additional layer, the tonal value will become darker. I will start by painting a petal on the paper. You must allow it to completely dry before proceeding to the next petal. You'll then add another petal and continue to layer it each time, but in between layers, you must allow it to completely dry. You will begin to see the different tonal layers as you build upon each layer. You want to keep your paints transparent, but with each additional layer, your colors will darken as you overlap one another. Remember, the important part of this technique is before you start another layer, you must allow it enough time to dry. This technique helps to create a beautiful transparency that makes the quality of the painting look so beautiful. Next, I'm going to demonstrate how to do layering with more than one color. Layering is a form of color mixing. By layering 2 different colors, you can produce a 3rd color. I will begin painting with a blue layer. Once it has completely dry, I will add a red layer. Please allow each color to completely dry before painting over it. Now I will add another layer in yellow. Once it is dry, you should be able to see the color underneath. Lastly, I will add a final layer in green. If you like this video, please give it a like down below and subscribe to see more video demonstrations by Art Connection.